This lesson's the next lesson in the Richard and John unit. And what this lesson's going to be looking at is what life was like in a medieval town. Now, this is something you might have done early on in your history curriculum, especially in year 7 when you look at life in medieval England, especially after the Battle of Hastings. What we need to understand with this lesson is what the key features of towns were, explaining the pros and cons, the positives and negatives. We need to look at why the towns were so important to the medieval monarch, but then also look at the similarities and differences between towns and villages. So this is the syllabus of the exam board, and what we need to understand is that we're down here in English society. We've already done a lesson on the nature of agriculture and peasant life. Next, we need to look at towns, life in towns and their role in the economy. We're doing this in a little bit of a different order. Okay, we start with these units and then we go backwards. So first thing, this would be your generic picture of a medieval town. And what you need to look at straight away is just how different it is. And what this lesson is going to do is to identify those differences. Now, this also does link to the medicine course, because you look at how bad towns were when you look at the Black Death of 1348. Remember, this course is between 1189 to 1216. What do we notice straight away? It's a lot busier. There's a lot more people. You can still see the religious impact of a church in the corner here. You can also see some evidence of farming. But more importantly, you can see the towns being protected. This suggests that the towns were a lot more important in regards to the overall running of the economy. Now, this is really important to understand. As the villages were important in terms of feeding the nation, the towns were important in raising significant levels of money, income, for the king. So we need to look at a range of different things. And we're going to look at 4 areas. We're going to look at town government, town guilds, the importance of town to the economy, and annual fairs. And then I'm going to give you a few questions that you can look over. So the first thing, the town government. So basically what this means is, how was the town run? How did you become a town? So many towns were established by a royal charter. Now, the only person that could give you a royal charter was the king, and you had to pay for this. The royal charter suggests that the king deems you very important. Now, the key thing about a royal charter, once the king allowed you it, was that it meant that the town was free from the control of the local lord. So what a royal charter gave a town was a lot more freedom than say a village. The village is under the control of the lord of the manorial estate. Then you have people like the bailiffs, the reeves. A town, if you get a royal charter, you are free from that control. You can control and run yourself. So what does this mean? Well, it means that a town has a law court. They have their own court and had a form of self-government. And what that means is they can control themselves. To get a charter, you'd need a significant level of money, which would be paid to the king. Another good thing about having a royal charter is that you'd be restricted from certain taxes. Well, the other problem there, though, is that you'd have to pay a lot more if you were a very well-off town. London was the biggest town. And when we look at this course, especially when we get to King John, London becomes very important. London elected people called aldermen, who were responsible for certain parts of the town. So these aldermen would sit in law courts and make judgments on legal cases. This is where the king benefits, because towns like London had to pay £300 a year for this privilege. So it wasn't just a one-off payment. Some towns had to pay continuous payments to ensure that they could keep their freedom from the king. If a town was very important, the king might allow them to elect their own mayor to govern the city. I mean, the king was obviously very careful in this respect, because the king didn't want to give too much power to too many people. So that's how the town would have been governed, run. That's how you become a town. Town guilds is the next piece of information that's very important. Now, what a guild was, it says a guild developed out of groups of individuals working in the same trade. So a guild, if we're going to break it down about the actual meaning, a guild is a group of workers who do the same job. I'm going to put trade in brackets. For example, the guild records of Leicester show many different guilds, such as weavers, bakers, carpenters, and masons. Now, if you don't know what a mason is someone who works with stone. And there were 40 towns with guilds by the end of King John's reign in 1216. Now, what you've got to understand is that these guilds, I'm just going to add this to the top, guilds were very important to the development of the economy. The more trade equaled the more money. More money, potentially higher taxes. A bit like in our society today, the rich get taxed more. If you earn a certain amount, you get taxed more because you earn more. A bit like these people in the trade, they were very skillful people. Now, anyone who was part of a guild, a member, had to pay to enter and promise they would pay their taxes. If you didn't pay your taxes, that's quite a serious crime, and the king definitely would frown upon anyone who withholds money that should go to the king's treasury. Membership of a guild meant that a tradesman had unrestricted right to trade in that town. That means, this phrase here, unrestricted trade to the town, means that they could work as much as they want and sell as much as they want in the town that they are part of the guild. If you weren't a member, you couldn't do the job. And the most important guilds were those who made cloth, because wool production was England's richest industry. It was sold all across Europe. So that's another important thing, is that guilds produced goods that were sent to Europe. Well, why is this good? It brings in a lot more income to the country. So town guilds were really important. It was groups of people that worked together in the same industry, but it was also guaranteed money for the King of England. By having a guild, that's a promise for those people that you would pay your taxes. So how important were the towns to the economy? So towns raised a significant amount of money for the king, and that can't be understated. Really important. So first of all, trade was controlled by tolls, which had to be paid on sales and purchases. So anything that you paid, there was like an add-on on top of it. A bit like VAT that we have today. If you go to a restaurant and you look at the receipt, it says VAT added. It's a bit like that. Tolls were also collected when people use certain roads. Now, in some places in the country, you have to pay to go, especially on the road, you have to pay to go through. One of the most famous examples was the Severn Bridge, where you had to pay to go into Wales. That's been removed now, but that was one of the most famous examples. And all that money would go to improve the bridge. The money that was used on these tolls on certain roads would go to the king. The king also collected taxes on goods which were imported and exported, so sent out and brought in. Buying and selling happened in local markets which were held on a Sunday. One of the key features of a medieval town was the market on a Sunday. Traders sold goods on open tables and records were kept. They sold items, and they were basically, anyone that took part in local market were basically, they had to pay for it. They had to pay rent for their tables and stalls. Some stalls also charged for the weight of goods, and that would also be taxed. Markets boosted towns' income, making them very rich. They were the most important part of a medieval town. They provided the king with regular income. The next point says that trade was sometimes impacted as the roads were in a bad condition. One thing that hadn't been developed fully is the road system yet, and they weren't in the best conditions. So if there was a significant amount of rain, flooding occurred, which meant travel was slow and trade was impacted by it. Again, very similar to our society today. If the weather's bad, people tend to go out less. If the weather's better, we'll go out more. Now, the towns with ports were vital to England's trade as they allowed goods to be brought from and sold to foreign countries. The areas like Portsmouth, Southampton, really key towns that had access to a port means that more can be brought in and sent out. Not just this, but you could also speed up the trade between coastal towns as it was quicker to travel by sea than it was to travel by road. Don't forget, you don't have cars in this time period, so you can't travel to and from areas quickly. The port areas allowed this to happen. Right, the next bit. The annual fair. Another way that the king earned money was through an annual fair, a yearly fair. That's what the term annual means. Some towns had annual fairs. They were usually held on important religious days. Fairs usually lasted several days and attracted traders from other towns and foreign countries. What this was, it was a big money-making thing. If you think about, let's put it into local perspective. If you look at Nottingham, and you look every year, Nottingham has Goose Fair. That brings a lot of money into the area. It brings people from different areas into the city. Now, there's many purposes of these fairs. Now, in the medieval times, the first purpose was merrymaking, drinking and having a good time. Sports were played like archery, bowling and skittles. But after the merrymaking is when the business happened. Trade would happen, which would include luxury items such as wine and silk. Luxury items, luxury goods means more money. Now, to hold these annual fairs, the towns paid a significant amount of money to the king, and it raised huge revenue in tolls and taxes to the amount of people that were coming to the area. Now, here's some questions based on the last few slides that you can answer if you pause the video and you can answer them. What is the Royal Charter? What was the biggest town? What could towns with a charter avoid paying? What types of jobs would an alderman do? Name 2 types of guilds. How many towns had guilds by the end of King John's reign? What happened every Sunday? Why were roads sometimes not helpful to the towns? What happened during an annual fair before the trading? And what material was vitally important? That's the question. So if you pause the video now and you can answer those questions just as a little revision activity, make sure you've understood the last few pieces of information. So going back to the start of the lesson, we now need to look at the positives and the negatives of a town. So what you've got here is a slide with loads of information. Now you can use the information that we've done so far to fill in this table. The next thing you can do though is look at these statements. And we're going to look at whether it's positive or negative. So I'll do smiley face, sad face. If you want to do this first before I go through it, just pause the video and fill in the table, and then play it again and I'll go through the answers. All townsmen were free. Furthermore, if a villain ran away into a town and escaped for 1 year and 1 day, they would be free. That's a positive. Now remember, a villain is a peasant from a village, and if they escaped into the town for 1 year and 1 day, they would also be free. Towns were crowded and dirty and disease spread quite quickly. That's not great. Town dwellers are the people that sort of live there, emptied their chamber pots into the streets and waste would be washed into the wells, causing disease. Not great. There was a police force at night that would protect the town after the curfew bell rang. That's good. They were known as the watchmen. The town was protected with a stone wall separating it from the countryside. That's good for the town. Various jobs were available. You could learn a trade from the age of 14 and become an apprentice. You would be training for 5 to 9 years before becoming a master. There's more opportunity than being a farmer, so that's good. The town could have different jobs, more variety in farming. Awful smiley face. Women still had domestic duties to do, but could also work in a trade. There was more possibilities for women in this setting. Towns Towns allowed the king to make money as he would tax them on goods and charge towns to hold markets and aspects of the town that was very important. This is a good thing because it allows the running of the country to be more effective. Even though towns were richer, much of the population was poor. Only merchants of them were well-off individuals. Well, that's not great because you still have a high population of poor people. Churches were an important area of the town. Merchants would pray to God for protection on their travels. That's good. If you don't know what a merchant is someone that sells things. And the last one, housing was built on narrow streets with shops at the front. Many houses were crowded due to large number in towns. That's also not very good. Just as a quick side note, in the medieval town, if you wanted to know what shop you wanted to go into, there'd be signs outside, because remember, not many people could read or write. So, for example, if you wanted to go to a barber surgeon, it'll be the red and white barber sign. You probably still see in some barbers in today's society. There is a few key words and there's a little bit of revision. The main thing here is you split it up into town and village. That can be the final bit you do for this lesson. It's a little revision, but remember the key thing for this lesson is, number one, describe two features. That might be a question. And number two, can you explain why the town was so important to the king? You can think of 3 reasons. You're on a winner right there.